Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, March 30th, 2021, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the 2022 United States Senate elections and talking about which states have changed ratings and why I think that certain states might be moving in a different direction than what was indicated on the presidential level in both 2016 and 2020. Now, the reason why I mentioned 2016 is because it was the last time a Republican won the presidency, and also when this exact Senate map was up back 6 years ago from when this election would be held. And pretty much, what we saw in 2016 was a Republican Party sweep with a few exceptions, with a few Democratic pickups in Illinois and New Hampshire, ultimately bringing the Democrats to 48 seats. Well, we know they are doing better now with a 50-50 majority in the United States Senate. Before we actually get into the prediction, as I mentioned in my previous video, I'm using a new microphone. So if you guys actually prefer this microphone, I'm going to go ahead and stick with it. I've seen a very positive reception. I've heard from many of you guys that it does actually skew a little bit to the left. I've adjusted my microphone so it's over on the leftward side of me, so you aren't going to hear it as much, meaning most of my voice is being projected into the right side of the microphone. I've tested it out a few times and I think that it sounds pretty balanced, but again, it's all up to your guys' viewing experience and listening experience, and I want to hear directly from you. So if you think that this is okay, the reason why I couldn't fix it in terms of exporting is because I never edit my videos, so I really don't have any software that can export it, at least fix that audio issue. Once I find one, I think that I might end up using that one, but as of right now, I'm sort of stuck with just adjusting my microphone so it can counteract the leftward bias of the oh wow, I should not have said that. Leftward skew of the voice. So let's take a look at the 2022 Senate maps. It's going to be pretty interesting, I think, when we're looking at some of these races. We know that many of them are going to end up safe for the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. That really isn't too much in discussion. We're going to talk about some states that are traditionally swing states that I think should also be considered to be safe states. You're not going to see too many of those, just a few that I think are going to be either in the likely or solid end for both parties. Even though they traditionally may be swing states, it ultimately comes down to the popularity of political parties in that state and also the popularity of certain incumbents. So as of right now, we're at 45 Democratic safe states. For the Republicans, they're at 30, but I have yet to characterize all of their safe states. So let's go ahead and get through that. We have Idaho, Utah, North and South Dakota. Kansas was slightly competitive back in 2020, not so much in 2022. Oklahoma's never really competitive. Arkansas, Louisiana. Missouri has been floated by some as potentially competitive. Until we see a very strong Democratic candidate announced, I'm going to work under the assumption that Republicans are going to do well there. But if Eric Greitens is the nominee, it will narrow up. But for right now, I'm not going to assume he's going to be the nominee simply because of what happened to Chris Kobach in neighboring Kansas just 2 years ago. So, just a year ago. I don't know why I'm acting like it's 2022 yet. But when I say that, you'll sort of understand which year I'm referencing, but I'll try to keep it uniform. So Missouri, I think for right now, should be considered to be safe for the GOP. Kentucky, absolutely. South Carolina, absolutely. Indiana. Now, Kentucky was supposed to be a competitive race back in 2020. Absolutely was not. It was pretty much just a money burner for the Democratic Party. South Carolina was also a money burner, but it came within 10 points. It was much narrower than Kentucky. Lindsey Graham was just not a beatable senator. It was just a very unfortunate reality for the Democratic Party that they did not perform as well as they thought they were going to do. So South Carolina went to the Republicans in 2020, will absolutely go to them in 2022 unless we see a drastic change here. And even though Richard Shelby, the incumbent Republican in Alabama, has announced he is retiring, I'm going to still keep it in the safe Republican column. Even though a Democrat won there back in 2017, that was under extenuating circumstances, things that we are not going to see a rise in 2022. Alabama goes red. And the final state that I'm going to characterize as safe for the GOP is the state of Alaska. Now, you might be wondering, why haven't I characterized Alaska yet? Well, I want to show you how it voted in the 2020 election to bring you a pretty good understanding of why the state is not in the at least immediate safe Republican column, because it's not that the Democrats could potentially win in Alaska. It's that Lisa Murkowski is facing a firm primary, not primary, there's no general primary here. I'll explain it in just a moment. Donald Trump won the state of Alaska by 10 points, but on the same ballot as that, they passed ranked choice voting. This was a ballot measure that was passed by the citizens here, and it was passed 51-50. So it was very, very close. The yes went away with it, and it ended up being ranked choice voting. So how this works, the reason why I might not have initially characterized it as safe for the GOP is because Lisa Murkowski might have been primaried. And then it could have come down to a point where some of those more moderate Republicans would have opposed a Trump-like nominee in the state of Alaska and potentially voted for the Democrat Independence Libertarian candidate. But now that we're in ranked choice voting, it is considered safe for the Republican Party because every single Democratic voter is going to rank Lisa Murkowski above the Trump candidate, which means that even if a lot of Republicans end up supporting the Trump-backed candidate, there are more moderates and Democrats combined than there are Trump-wing Republicans in Alaska. Alaska was not the closest it had been in a long time for a reason, for no reason. I mean, Donald Trump made Alaska more competitive, and Joe Biden came within nearly single digits in Alaska. Even in 2008, a landslide year for Obama, it was won by over 20 points for John McCain. Alaska should not be competitive. It should never be competitive, but it was slightly competitive in 2020. In fact, if we're being honest about it, Alaska was closer than Colorado. Alaska was closer than Virginia, to put it in perspective. Alaska was closer than Virginia and Colorado and New Mexico. Isn't that something? But let's go ahead and move back to our 2022 election predictions here. I will say Alaska goes to the GOP. When you see it red, that means Lisa Murkowski, not another Republican. So 11 toss-up races so far. But like I had said, I'm going to characterize some states that are traditionally competitive as likely or solid for either party. The first state I'm going to rate as solid for the political parties, despite it being traditionally a toss-up, which means that normally you might see, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party targeting it. This is the state of Colorado. Now, after the 2020 election, I'm not going to say it's really a toss-up state. I think in the future, it absolutely could be a Republican state, but not right now. The future doesn't mean tomorrow. The future doesn't mean 2022 or 2024. So I'm going to say Colorado, with full confidence, is going to be pretty solid for the Democrats. If we see a strong GOP candidate and what would be a red wave year, I still don't think they're going to win, but maybe it could move down to likely, maybe it could move down to lean. But a victory is a victory. It's 6 years regardless, but I do want to point out Colorado should not be on the target list for the GOP because it simply isn't winnable. 46 seats for the Democrats, 44 for the Republicans. Well, they're actually going to bring themselves back up to 46 to match the Democrats, the same way they're matching them right now in the 50-50 Senate. And they're going to do this through 2 states. So, states that are traditionally competitive in the Rust Belt region include Ohio, and Iowa isn't a part of the Rust Belt, but it definitely gets grouped in with a lot of these states when you're looking at the general region. When John King draws that circle or Steve Kornacki does it, you'll see them pretty much group in these main competitive states from Minnesota to Pennsylvania, including Ohio and Iowa. So Iowa and Ohio, I think certainly could be competitive depending on the Democratic nominees. It looks as if Tim Ryan might be running in Ohio because of the fact that he's certainly driven speculation into it because he might be drawn out of having its own congressional district. Ohio is set to lose a district, so the Democrats are going to be at an unfortunate position where they may lose a seat in Ohio. I think if he does decide to run, it'll still probably be a lean or likely margin for the GOP. But just to point out that it's not going to be safe as it would be under Rob Portman. And the same thing in Iowa with Chuck Grassley. Now, the thing is, even if Chuck Grassley does end up the nominee, I've sort of revised where I think this race will actually go. I think that the Democratic Party, they won't have a chance, but they will narrow up the race significantly from where it was back in 2016, because the majority of Iowa voters do not want Chuck Grassley to run again. They think he's too old for the seat. That's the general consensus amongst the majority of Iowa voters based off recent polling data, I think from the Des Moines Register. According to the most accurate pollster of both the 2016 and the 2020 election in Iowa. But looking at the composition there, the electoral composition, if Chuck Grassley ends up the Republican nominee, I think he'll still have enough support in order to win. Even though the majority of voters don't want him to run, if he's still going to run, yes, he's defied their wishes, but they'd rather have him than a Democrat, or rather have him than anyone else in that seat. But the issue of age certainly has arisen in Iowa, but I don't think it's something that would disqualify him or make him lose as the Republican nominee. So right now I'm working under the assumption he's running for re-election. Even if he doesn't, I think it'll be a likely margin. I think his grandson could easily swoop into that race and just hold the family name and hold on to that Iowa Senate seat. So that puts the Democrats at 46, puts the Republicans at 46 as well. Let's go ahead and look into some of the states that I think will be decided by larger margins, then move down into the ones that I think will be decided by the least amount. So the first likely state out of these 8 toss-up races is the state of Florida. I think Marco Rubio is going to have a pretty good time in this race. When you're looking at the 2020 election results, Florida wasn't exactly a Democratic state. If you're looking at the 2018 election results, Florida wasn't exactly a Democratic state. If you're looking at 2016, Florida wasn't exactly a Democratic state. And I really don't think that we are going to see a strong Democratic nominee. I think that we're going to see a sacrificial lamb, and I think that Marco Rubio simply will be unbeatable due to the fact he has tapped into a lot of the Hispanic vote. Let's take Miami-Dade County, for example. Looking at this county, Patrick Murphy only won by around 11 points. Hillary Clinton won this county by over 30 points. Marco Rubio got a lot of crossover support. That's why he was able to win by nearly 8 points in the state of Florida. When you're looking at the state's electoral history, it's pretty much immune to wave years, which is why I don't think it'll matter if it's a Democratic year or a Republican year, but the Republicans still have some type of advantage. It's not a solid red state. It's not a likely red state for normal characterizations, but Marco Rubio is especially popular and taps into a base that Republicans traditionally do not. Rick Scott won by a very narrow amount because Bill Nelson couldn't tap into Hispanic voters the same way Hillary Clinton could have. If he won them by the same margin, Bill Nelson would have been reelected as a senator. But Marco Rubio here is completely changing the tide because he's able to tap into not only those white and older voters, a huge retirement state, Florida, on top of that, minority voters. And, I think he will continue that into 2022, which is why I don't think the Democrats should be too hopeful about that Senate race there, but might be able to be hopeful about 2024, depending on who the nominees are going to be. So right now, my first likely state is going to be a state with a very large Hispanic population. That is the state of Florida. Marco Rubio, I think, will win by a likely margin. The next state that I'm going to characterize as likely is a move from the lean Democratic column. This is moving from lean D to likely D, and that is the state of Nevada. I know you might think I'm crazy for making this characterization, but I think Catherine Cortez Masto might actually fare pretty well. When you're looking at the 2020 results, you're not going to assume that Nevada is going to be a likely state, but you also wouldn't assume the same thing for Florida, given the circumstance. And Nevada has been reliable for the Democratic Party on multiple occasions. This same exact race was actually won by the same margin as Joe Biden did on the 2020 presidential election, 2.4%. Catherine Cortez Masto was replacing an outgoing Democrat. Well, in an open race, she won by 2.4%. And with Joe Biden underperforming amongst minority voters, he also won by 2.4%. I think Catherine Cortez Masto could tap into the same type of base as Jackie Rosen did in 2018 and potentially defeat her Republican opponent by a large margin. And the thing is, Jackie Rosen was running against an incumbent Republican. It wasn't as if she was running in an open race. This was not the, Harry Reid retiring situation. No, this was the Democratic Party running against a Republican incumbent and winning by 5 points. And I think that if Catherine Cortez Masto plays her cards right, and I don't think that the GOP is going to find a super strong candidate, right now it looks as if Adam Laxalt is going to be that nominee, a failed candidate in the past. I don't think that would be their strongest play for the GOP, and I think it would definitely help the Democratic Party win it by a likely margin as it stands today. I think that the GOP is surprisingly weak in terms of who they could field in Nevada, and right now I'm not too hopeful on their side. So 6 toss-up races. All of these characterizations are now going to be decided by a lean characterization or closer, which means tilt. Tilt means it's decided by less than 1%. So let's go ahead and take a look. Well, the first state I'm going to characterize as lean for the Democratic Party is the state of Arizona. I think as it stands right now, Arizona is growing in terms of its population. Phoenix itself is growing in terms of population. We are seeing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of new minority voters, which typically split for the Democratic Party 70 to 30, 90 to 10, depending on the different demographic groups. And when you're looking at Arizona, I think that it's just going to be a more Democratic state than it was in 2020. I think the Democrats with Mark Kelly there have an especially strong candidate, and I think that they certainly could do well looking at Arizona. He's one of the few Democrats that didn't underperform Joe Biden when it came down to the Senate races in 2020. So Arizona, as it stands currently, I'm going to say lean for the Democratic Party, especially since the statewide GOP has clung on to Donald Trump so heavily. The state that I'm going to characterize, again, as lean for the Democratic Party is the state of New Hampshire. I think Chris Sununu is ready to run. I think he's going to run. He's a popular governor there. And while Joe Biden was able to win the state of New Hampshire by 7 points in 2020, Chris Sununu won on the same ballot by a very large amount. We can see, actually, in New Hampshire, it wasn't as if Chris Sununu won by 7 points. No, we're talking a very large victory here. Chris Sununu won with 65% of the vote. He is popular, but also legislating is very different than being a senator. So looking at what happens in New Hampshire, I think it'll really come down to the wire. As it stands right now, lean for the Democrats. So that brings them to 49, brings the Republicans to 47. For the Republicans, I'm actually going to change my characterization of North Carolina being a lean red state down to tilt red. I think the Democratic Party is going to use a lot of these voter suppression laws in order to drive up energy in certain states. And until those states actually pass a lot of these voter suppression laws, I think we are going to see certain states certain statewide GOP see an adverse effect of the laws being passed in other states. The ACLU announced today that they're suing the state of Georgia over this new law, this new voter suppression law that was just passed by the Republican state legislature. And I think that actually will make Georgia narrower. That actually brings me to my next point, where I think Georgia will be decided by a tilt to Democratic margin. I think Raphael Warnock will certainly be able to do well, depending on who his opponent is. And based off any of the ones that have been mentioned so far, Vernon Jones, Herschel Marker, Doug Collins, Kelly Loeffler, I think Raphael Warnock still has the upper hand. But I think that it will minimize the amount the Democrats can win by in Georgia, but maximize the amount the Democrats can potentially win in other states simply through energy and simply through the use of campaign ads and campaign rhetoric that Republicans are trying to, as the Democrats will put it, cheat in order to win the election, pass laws in order to prevent minority voters from voting. And I think that's going to be a message that will be usable beyond, the Democratic Party's message of 2020, that they weren't the party of Trump, or that they will be opponents to a potential Trump presidency, whatever it might be. What we see now is that messaging will move away from that, and just the Democratic Party arguing points against the GOP's new laws due to election integrity that's supposedly supposed to help the security of our elections, when in reality it's disproportionately affecting minority citizens. But that brings us to our final two states. I'm going to keep Pennsylvania in the lean Democratic column. I think it will still be decided by a lean Democratic margin as of right now. I'm looking at the candidates that are running in Pennsylvania. I think many of them could do well statewide, and the GOP isn't exactly running their best. I think that we will start to see two breakaway candidates. It could be John Fetterman in Pennsylvania. We don't know yet. We could see a breakaway candidate in the GOP, and then we'll have a more general idea of who's going to go ahead and match up against each other in the general election. But as it stands currently, Pennsylvania is still a Democratic state from 2020, still has many Democratic statewide officials. The GOP was able to win here in 2016, but that was on the same ballot as Donald Trump, and he only outperformed him by literally less than a percentage point. I'm not going to say that Pennsylvania is going to be solid for the GOP. I don't think they're going to have a super easy chance at winning in Pennsylvania, even though they are the incumbent party. When you're outgoing, you're entering, you're leaving an open race, which means the Democrats have a very clear opportunity to swoop in here and win in Pennsylvania. And the final state I'm going to characterize is going to be another changed characterization. Rather than have Wisconsin as a tilt Republican state, I'm going to move it into the toss-up column. Ron Johnson has been consistently floating that he's not going to run, or that he might run depending on the Democratic Party's quote-unquote overreach of power or overstep of boundaries, whatever however he puts it. It looks as if so far he's not going to run. And I think that if he does run or if he doesn't run, the result will likely be the same. He is a Trump Republican if there ever was one in a competitive state. Many of these Republicans in competitive states are much more reserved about their support of President Trump. And I think that's largely due to the fact that they know that some of these states aren't going to be super solid to them. I think that Georgia was really a shocker when Donald Trump went all in Georgia and ended up losing those two Senate races for the GOP. So when you're looking at Wisconsin, I think Ron Johnson, regardless if he runs or not, it will be a toss-up race. Ron Johnson had every intention of voting against the certification of certain battleground states in a very similar region, had every intention of voting against Pennsylvania being certified electorally. Ron Johnson, only changed his mind after the Capitol insurrection and then said a number of things that were very much racially charged. And I think that, what you're seeing here is that he is going to see a large display of opposition from minority communities, more so than a traditional Republican, simply because of the comments that he has made in the past and what that means for voters, because they can be inspired by people saying things against them. The same way that Donald Trump was one of the best people to help the Democratic Party do well in 2018, that wasn't a fluke. 2018 was not a fluke. That was because of Donald Trump. It was not because of the Democratic Party's constant messaging. I think that certainly helped, but without Donald Trump in the Oval Office, if it was a traditional Republican, I can't imagine Democrats would have been able to hold on to Montana or hold on to West Virginia by the margins that they did. And I think that looking at the 2022 results, I think Ron Johnson is going to see a lot of voters angry with him in Wisconsin, but it ultimately comes down to what type of year it's going to be. If it's a red wave year, Wisconsin might tilt red. If it's a blue wave year, Wisconsin might tilt blue. It also comes down to who the Democratic nominee is going to be. And looking at Wisconsin in 2020, it wasn't necessarily a solid Democratic state by any standard. It was one of the closest ones, but it doesn't mean that the Democrats lost it. The Democrats still have that upper hand in Wisconsin, and in 2018, when they had the Senate election, Wisconsin actually went to the Democrats by nearly 10 points. So looking at the state, sometimes it goes very solid for the Democrats. In others, it goes for the Republican Party. In 2022, if Ron Johnson leaves, or if he's there, I think it will be one of the closest races we are going to watch, which is why I am not personally comfortable characterizing the race in a direction as it stands today. It's going to remain as the sole toss-up race. I don't like doing this to you guys, but we're a year and a half away. I have the ability to do so for right now, and of course, as we get closer, I'm going to characterize it, hopefully by the next prediction. But this is your end of the month 2022 election recap. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. Make sure to comment down below whether or not this is a balanced version of the microphone. I've tried to move it over so that way you can hear on both the left and the right side equally. Hopefully it works out. Let me know down below, and I will see you all later today.